Hello, welcome to Real Life, Real Leaders. I'm your host, Bonnie Hageman, and today we have a special guest, Mimi MacLean. Mimi is the CEO of the Badass CEO podcast and a new book, How to Be a Badass Female CEO. Welcome to the podcast, Mimi.
Thank you so much for having me on, Bonnie.
I'm super excited to do this interview because you have had quite a career. I've been going through your background, and you started out on Wall Street.
I did.
And then you did all kinds of interesting things. And now you're running a really exciting podcast and your new book. And I know you're doing investing. But I would love for you to just start from the beginning. Tell us about your career.
Sure. Yes, I started at Kidder Peabody a long time ago, right out of college, doing the 2-year investment banking program. And then from there, it's just kind of, I don't want to say bounced around, but I'm kind of like the jack of all trades, master of none. I wanted to get my, when Kidder went under, instead of staying in investment banking, I wanted to get my CPA. My dad was a CPA. He ran the tax department at Arthur Andersen. So he always was like, as a female, you want to have something to fall back on, get your CPA. So I did. I went back to night school and got my my credits for getting my CPA, my accounting courses in New York City while I was working. And I went back and worked at Price Waterhouse and got my CPA. And the day, I think it was 2 years to the day when you need to have like your requirements to get your CPA, I quit because I knew I was not an accountant. It was just not me. But I always felt like I was entrepreneurial and I wanted to do something like learn how to run a business and kind of get in there. And that's why I actually went back to, I worked for the buying program at Bloomingdale's because I wanted to see what it was like to actually run a business. And as a buyer, you do everything from marketing to buying to pricing to pretty much you're running your own company for the department that you're in. And so that's what I did. And then from there, I went and got my MBA. So I've always I majored in entrepreneurship. I was one of the finalists for the business plan competition there for my idea with my partner. I've always been entrepreneurial. I always knew I wanted to kind of do my own thing eventually because I wanted to have a family and kind of be home for my children, but also keep my, finger in the pot for working and stuff. So so it's kind of do that. But what I've been doing for the last probably 10 years is investing in companies and at the early stage, really, really early, like seed round. And so that's what I would have been doing. And I actually been working with the people and the companies that we usually invest in to try to help advise them and grow them. And so that kind of led me down the path. One of our investments was Beauty Counter. I don't know if you're familiar with Beauty Counter, but when they launched, because we invested in that pre-launch, when they launched, I decided to sign up as a consultant because even though I was in retail my whole life, I'd never done direct selling. So I wanted to see what that was like. So I've been, the last 8 years, I've been doing that as well, as far as like being a part of a Beauty Counter consultant and growing a team and selling Beauty Counter.
Okay. So it's direct sales. All right. I did not know that. I'm not familiar with Beauty Counter. So tell us a little bit more about that. What is it about?
So the reason why I got into Beauty Counter was I have always been into, holistic kind of clean living. And that's always been a passion of mine ever since my kids have been born, even probably before that, but I really dove into it when my children were born. And so when one of my friends said, "Hey, I'm going to start this business," there's not really any clean beauty products out there where the chemicals, and she's like, "You're one of the only people I know that buy all their stuff at Whole Foods." And so we invested in it. And then when she launched, she set it up as a direct retail or MLM. And when she says direct retail, why it's different than a regular MLM is because she has stores. You don't have to, like a lot of MLMs, you have to buy through a consultant. You don't. You could go to beautycounter.com and just buy.
And let me weigh in just for a second. If you don't know, MLM means multi-level marketing. And so it's just you build layers of teams underneath you as a direct salesperson. So then you're able to grow your income other than your own direct sales.
Yeah. And I mean, MLM got a really bad rap I don't know which company it was, so I don't want to say it. I think I know, but I don't want to say the wrong company. But either way, it got a bad rap a long time ago, MLM, because it used to, like, as a consultant, you would have to like buy like all this product and store it in your garage, and then you were stuck with thousands of dollars of products, and then it didn't sell. So the way, I mean, anybody who's listening who wants to do something entrepreneurial and doesn't have the capital to go start your own business or can't forego your income, like going and looking at a direct selling company, honestly, as an entrepreneur, I kind of always poo-pooed it, to be honest with you. And then now looking back on it, like you need very minimal capital. You are your own boss. And you don't, like, in today's day and age, that's kind of what all these influencers are doing. If you think about it, like, hey, buy this, do this, and they're getting a click through. Like that, in a sense, is
Absolutely.
what direct selling is like you're selling the product and getting a piece of the action. And now, like, especially with beauty counter, a lot of them, they don't require you to inventory anything. So there's really no liability for you. There's not a lot of risk. And it's just a great way to be an entrepreneur without having a lot of risk. And you don't have to worry about like the marketing and the inventory and all the other headaches that
I agree with you completely. In fact, in my lifetime, I've joined a couple of them. And I will tell you that, I have a master's degree. I educate myself continuously. And one of the ones that I was in early on, early in my career, like while I was still just fresh out of college, was one of the best educations of my life. Because
Mhm.
not only did we learn to sell, and really, it was a hard sell at that time. And so, couldn't that stuff that I do now that is much more high level consultative, is easy compared to that. But that's where I learned. And then we also, they were the organizations that I joined back then were really good about bringing in motivational speakers, and I learned a lot from them.
Yeah,
And
it's great
so
training and it's
it's
free
great
training
training.
because once you sign up, they continuously give great training. And like you said, anybody who is starting out a career who's listening to this, like learning how to sell no matter what early on in your career is key. I wish
Absolutely.
someone told me that early on because I wish I had done it sooner. Well, I actually did. I worked for Procter and Gamble one summer selling like health and beauty products to all this, supermarkets, like at 6 in the morning. But I mean, that wasn't like really selling, but learning how to sell, I feel like then it helps you later on in life with anything because anything you're doing, you're selling. It's either you're selling your
I
product, you're
agree.
selling your services, and
Yourself, it just one way or another, you're selling.
yeah, and it's all numbers. Everything I
Yes.
realize now, it comes down to numbers. Like you can't take anything and like personalize it and have it go to your head because you know what? No matter how much it comes down to like 10 to 1, like every 10 calls, you're going to get one call back, or every 10 people that sign up, you're going to have one that works. Like no matter what. And it applies to every almost aspect of your life. I feel like
I
no matter
I
what.
agree. I think you're absolutely right. And there's because my background it was in counseling psychology. I personally didn't value the numbers enough.
Hmm.
And now that I've been running businesses and for 20 years, I can tell you that you're exactly right. Like it is about the numbers. It's both. You have to value, like you said, the number of calls you make, the number of outreaches you have, the number of contacts in your database, all of those things. And then you have to value the financial numbers, and
Hmm.
that you have to really pay attention to that. So I agree.
But even
That's
like applying it to higher level, like people who might be listening who are CEOs, like it applies to too. Like if you're trying to raise capital, it's the same thing. Like anybody I talk to when they're like, hey, how did you raise capital? You make it seem so easy. They're like, no, I talked to 100 people before I got
yes,
one investment. So it's all
exactly.
numbers. It has nothing to do with like your idea. It has nothing to do with anything. It's just you have to put that time in no matter what.
That is right. Yes, I've been raising capital, so I am very familiar.
Hmm.
So thank you for sharing that. So keep going though. So I didn't mean to stop you. I just wanted to share about
No, so
what
anyway,
that
so
was
I've
in
been
case I didn't
doing
know.
that. But then besides that, I just been like anytime I have an idea, like I start like I'm working on a couple other ideas at this point that there's too early on to kind of dive into. But like, there's another company that I worked with a little bit early on that I invested in, which is Baby Barn Organic. So if anybody is a grandmother or anybody is newly pregnant or just had a baby, like check them out. It's like organic baby products, like cute clothing, very simple, minimal clothing. I invested in that and, helped them early on. So I just like getting involved with companies. So my husband and I do that where we get involved with companies and kind of help them with either raising capital or giving them advice and doing that as well. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And then I launched this about during the pandemic, my pandemic baby was the badass CEO. I decided like, hey, we're home. It'd be great to like, as I'm talking to these women sorry, so let me start again. So as I'm talking for these women for, raising capital, like I should just record it and make it into a podcast where I'm sharing people's story, kind of like how I built this, but more geared towards women,
Mhm.
and capital based and kind of what's, what they go through as women. And there definitely is some, obstacles that we have to overcome that men don't, and especially as it relates to raising capital, which is interesting. And that's one reason what led me to start to write that book is because as I did this, I didn't even realize that what like only 1.7% of women who run businesses ever reach $1 million in sales. And that like blew my mind away. I was like, wait,
It's
what? Like,
crazy.
how is it so low? And then only 5% reach CEO in corporate America. And so even though we're almost like 50-50 of workforce and 50-50 starting businesses. And then the statistic that blew me even further away was that as an investor, you're more than likely to have double income if you have a female CEO or female leadership.
Wow.
So
That's
like
interesting.
why are more, VCs and investors not investing in women, knowing that your returns are probably higher if you do invest in women? So, and
So
that's kind of
what
why.
happened, in your research, you think what do you think's behind the lack of capital for female CEOs?
For capital or why in general? I think capital, well, this is a couple things. I think one is like it is the boys network, right? It's like who you know and getting in there and getting your foot in the door. And like as an investor, you definitely want to invest in someone that's already like done it before, or already has a track record, right? So that's more than likely gonna happen if I have the same idea and one is like, a man that's had a track record and a female that doesn't, I probably will invest in somebody that's had a track record, right? But nothing to do with male and female. But that's just that. But put that aside. What I saw as a trend was really interesting. So men tend to have more like higher men, like 75 to 80% of men have mentors, and only like 35-40% of women have mentors. And and I thought that was really interesting that like why do women not seek mentors as much as men? And as you probably know, like not having a mentor is pivotal because it's like free advice. Someone who's already done it that's kind of showing you the way, helping you out, giving you their contacts. Like why are more women not doing that? And I think that's a huge part of it, right? Like just having those contacts and making sure you're surrounding yourself by people that want to help you and share their contacts, share their knowledge for free. It's free because otherwise all that stuff gets super expensive if you need to hire everything out. Um, and then the second thing a trend that I was kind of blown away because a lot of the women I have interviewed on my podcast are so successful, so smart, so beautiful. Like they're the package, right? And so many of them suffer from like, imposter syndrome or it's like confidence, which is like crazy, where like a woman will walk into a room and assume they know less than they actually do. And a man walks into a room and thinks they know more than they actually do. So I think women discount themselves more because we want to be over prepared and overqualified and over everything. Whereas I think men in general walk into a situation and they're just a little bit more like cocky or confident and they just don't, like they're not internalizing the whole thing as much as women are.
Yes.
Um, and I think I was surprised because I did like a little survey and like the number one, I think I asked like, what's the biggest concern you have as a CEO? And like the number one response besides like finance, it was like imposter syndrome. I was like, what? Like I was shocked. But then I think you need to realize as women that you always have to be out of your comfort zone, right? It's kind of like going to the gym, not that I go there that often, but it's kind of like going to the gym that like you have to like always be pushing yourself and you always have to be sore every day or else you're not getting stronger and you're not like pushing yourself. It's kind of the same idea. It's like, unless you're pushing yourself and uncomfortable every day in whatever environment you're in, that means you're not pushing yourself. Like you're not reaching your fullest potential. Right. And so I think we all as women have to just be comfortable in being uncomfortable and just know that we're not always gonna like know how to do something or know the answers or not want like even doing videos or going on social media and putting yourself out there. Like it's super uncomfortable, but you got to do it, right?
Yes. And my experience is also like yours that women do have imposter syndrome. I have it at times myself. And I think that it's because we're pretty hard critics on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're hard critics on other people, but we're definitely hard critics on ourselves. And so I do think that's a big part of it. And I will tell you, I am co-founder of a network of women who completed board governance at Harvard. And now we have over 200 members from 23 countries. And so, when you think about who these women are, many are CEOs, many are on some really big boards, Fortune 50 boards. So, but not all of them. But so you think group of women, there's no way, like they must be, pretty confident all the time. Like, how would they get to these high level positions? And then when I wrote the book that you know about already, the new one that came out for us, The Courage to Advance, what I found out is that they all, even the highest level in that group,
Mm-hmm.
also had imposter syndrome. They were also wondering, am I wearing the right shoes? Like many of them were immigrants. Like they said, what signals am I sending? We're all looking around going, I bet they know more than I do. I bet
Mm-hmm.
they feel like they fit more than I do. And so it's kind of surprising, but I do think, well, I think men suffer from it too. I think women are more likely to admit they suffer from it,
Mm-hmm.
but I see that as well.
But I think there's two lessons to learn from that. One is we as women need to give other women breaks. Right? Because
Yes,
we're
we do.
critical of ourselves, like we look at ourselves in the mirror and we're like, "Ooh, we look a little heavy today," or "We look tired," or "We look like those are the wrong shoes with that outfit." We also tend to like look at other women when they walk in the room and they're like, "Ooh, why'd they wear that?" Like we kind of in our mind do that, and we need to give other women breaks in addition to ourselves. Whereas men
We
don't
do.
even care. Like
That's
they
correct.
don't care what you're wearing. They don't care. Like even if they have a fight with somebody, they don't care. They move on. They don't keep it personally. There's no drama as far as like
In
like
their
if you would have
heads, yes.
yeah, like whereas we it's like all of a sudden someone did something, we all have to talk about it. And like I'm generalizing, obviously,
Hmm.
right?
Obviously.
So
Yeah.
but so that's one lesson I feel like we have to as women cut each other breaks and lift each other up more and have each other's back a little bit more than I think we do. And then two is that's the reason why we're also make double the amount of money than men in like our businesses, like as in CEOs and to investors, because we are so on top of everything and consider ourselves underqualified. Like we make sure we're over prepared. We make sure we're like much more diligent and like on top of it that I think that's one reason why we probably make are more inclined to make more money for investors than
Right.
men.
And often more educated. What I see like in the board
Mhm.
governance area is that the women are taking every class, getting every certification. They are learning the new and the most up to date ways for board governance and the best practices. And many of the men are like, we know how to do this. And so
Mhm.
they're not going to those classes. And it will not be long. In fact, a lot of times it's already here where these women know more.
Mhm.
And like I've had multiple people say there are not enough qualified women. And I know a lot of board members because of the work that I've done with CEOs. And one of the things I can tell you is that many of the women I know could run circles around the board members I know. And so
Mhm.
so it's not that there are not enough qualified women. They may not have had the CEO seat, which is what a lot of them are looking for, but we have to get there. And I want to touch too on what you said about women supporting women. When we started our network, Women Execs on Boards, the culture we insisted on from the beginning was 100% committed to each other's success. And
Mhm.
we have maintained that and we're doing it really well, which is crucial especially when you have women who are geared toward, they're a bunch of A players, right? Like these are all high powered, high performing, you know, go get it kind of women with strong opinions. And so if we weren't 100% committed to each other's success, you could have issues.
Mhm.
But we have to get better at that, like you said. And I think that is probably the change that I'm seeing in the environment, is that women are starting to understand that we need to do that.
Mhm.
And we're getting better. I think we've got a ways to go, but we're definitely getting better at helping each other, holding each other up, pulling each other up. And you reminded me when I have a niece. She's funny for one thing. She's a leader in an energy company in Houston. But she said, you know, she and her girlfriends, and she's a beautiful, beautiful, sharp young woman. And she said, but we'd walk by and we'd see some beautiful woman, and she'd have a great purse and all that, and they'd be like, that B, right, and call them the B word. And she said, we realized like that's not the right thing to do. And so they started, when they see somebody like that, she said, now we say, you go, girl.
Mhm.
And so, just that one little reframing,
Mhm.
it's like, let's be proud of each other's success and let's celebrate it.
It's
Excuse
true.
me, celebrate that.
And bring more people with us for the ride,
Yes.
and help more
Yes.
women out. Um, yeah.
Yes, we had a speaker recently. She was an ambassador. I don't remember where she was an ambassador to, but from the US to another country. And she said when she gets invited to be on boards, she will not come without at least two more women.
Oh,
She
wow.
said, I will join your board, but I'm bringing two with me.
Yeah, but how does that happen? Because usually they only have one spot. So how
Well,
do they?
right. Yes. I don't know. It must not be like public boards, because you wouldn't have two more spots. But I don't know. But, you can change your bylaws if it's private board, and you can change it and add seats and all that.
Mhm.
So you can do it in public too. It just takes longer.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
interesting. No, it's true.
yeah.
Today's podcast is brought to you by EDA, a human capital firm that provides leadership development for your top of the house executives. One of our services is assessment and selection. Whether you're hiring, promoting, or developing your talent, the right assessments can provide much needed insight. They reduce bad hires and help you identify key areas of strengths as well as development needs. If you're interested in learning more about our assessment and selection programs for your organization, please reach out at www.executivedevelopment.com.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the concept of the podcast, the concept of the book. How are those things going? This has got to be your baby still.
Yeah,
And tell us
it's
more.
it's good. So so I think why I'm doing it is to just try to get women to realize that, especially women who are like stay-at-home moms right now, or women. I have had a lot of people that have read the book and they're like, this is perfect for my daughter that just came out of college, because it's like figuring out what you want out of life, like really, really like soul searching, like is it to reach, corporate America and to become CEO of some company? Because guess what? You have to like really think that through. Like you have to give up a lot. I hate to say it, but like you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't like have a ton of kids and then, well, now it's changed because you're not commuting as much before like we used to, right? But I think we can't have our cake and eat it too. We just can't. Like we all like something is going to falter. And so really kind of thinking through like, do you want to work for somebody else? Do you want to have your own thing? What's important to you? What are your values? Like and then that's like one thing, like when I try to invest in a company, I have to believe in the product. I have to believe in, like it could be like, oh, we can make a lot of money here. I'm like, I know, but that's not like what I believe in. Like, for example, I had somebody who wanted me to invest in like a kids cracker company. And I knew it was going to be a great success because like Whole Foods had already like invested or guaranteed spots on their in their on their shelves. And I was just like, I'm not doing it. And my husband's like, why? And I'm like, because it's not organic, which means then that like all the ingredients in there, yeah, it has less sugar, but it still has GMO products. And I'm not going to invest in a company that has GMO products. I'm just not doing it. And so, but I knew it was going to be successful. I just don't want to, so I think it's just figuring out what your values are and sticking to them early on and not selling yourself out for those values, I think is super important. And then I think the other thing I've continuously seen through my podcast right now is that it's all about perseverance, right? And it's all about like sticking to it. So like if you have an idea, like no matter what, even if you have to work because you have to pay your bills and pay your rent and whatever, do it on the side. Don't give up. Like just persevere and be able to adapt and kind of change and stick with your idea. But don't let anybody sell you short, like and that's another thing I would say too is I think a lot of women don't think big enough. I have a lot of women friends that are like entrepreneurial and they might be doing like, making candles out of their house or whatever. And they're selling it at, the local farmer's market. But then it's like, well, why aren't you thinking bigger? Like, why aren't you trying to sell it? And they're like, oh, I didn't know I could raise money and do that. And so I think don't sell yourself short. Like think big and go big, because you only got one life. And why let somebody else do it? You do it,
I agree. I agree. And first of all, I'd like to encourage our listeners to go listen to your podcast and get this book. It was very high rated on Amazon. It's a great book to get. And the not thinking big enough, I think, is a really big deal because what I tell people is you need a 20, 30, 40-year plan, right? Like look way ahead. If you know you want to run a tech company someday, then you can use that as your filter.
Yeah,
Does that
map it
help
out.
me to be a CEO of a tech company? If it doesn't, why am I doing it? And so that will help you with time management. And I also agree with what you're saying about not having it all. I can tell you that every woman who is at the top or who runs a company works very, very hard. And it is not a 40-hour week for either of those. And so you do have to really think about what you want. So I would just encourage the listeners to dive in and get the book and listen to the podcast.
Thank you.
Mimi, I also want to talk about the hard stuff because, we sometimes as leaders cover the background of the things that we're going through because, our employees don't want to see that. They want to see us as leaders. They want to feel safe and secure and that we know where we're going and all of that. But there's always hard stuff going on behind the scenes. So tell us about, what maybe one or two of the really hard things that you've been through and how did you get through them?
You mean like professionally or personally or?
Either or both. And the reason I say either or both is because, as leaders, it could be both. It could be like we're going through a divorce and, this has happened. I went through burnout, been through a divorce, these things are going on behind the scenes and yet you have to show up with your A game every day.
Yeah.
And so tell us about some of that stuff.
Well, it's interesting. I don't even know if you know this, but I've had chronic Lyme for the last 6 years. It happened right after my 5th child was born. I was bit by a tick and that has been an eye-opening experience for me having a chronic illness that nobody believes. The medical community doesn't believe in chronic Lyme and it's not covered by insurance. So
I did not know that. I know about chronic Lyme because one of my best friends is the world champion water skier, Christy Overton.
Oh, I know exactly who she is. I used to be a water skier. I had a bad water skiing accident when I was little where I severed my arm. I used to be a competitive water skier. And so I totally know who she is.
Who she is. So Christy and I are mothers of brothers. We both adopted from Russia and our sons are brothers.
Wow.
And so we are very good friends. But she had chronic Lyme. And so I'm familiar with that. And the Lyme disease comes from a deer tick. Is that correct?
It is. That's what that's what it is believed, but it's actually in the family of syphilis. So if you dive into it, like there's not a lot of people will say this is like controversial, political. You can also get it sexually and you can get it through gestationally. Because if you think about it, it's in the family of syphilis. So why couldn't you?
Sure.
But yes, traditionally it's a tick, or it could be a mosquito, or it could be any kind of like insect that has been on a deer that kind of
Right. I didn't know that part. So how has
Mhm.
that impacted you?
You know what? It has been absolutely life changing because I would say out of the past 6 years, I've probably spent 3 years of it in bed. And that's one reason why I started the podcast because I originally started a Lyme podcast where I talk to doctors every week. It's called Lyme 360, and I talk to Lyme patients and doctors and healers on how to get better. Because at first, when I got sick, I got better really fast, and I was like, "I'm done. I'm never gonna like mention the word Lyme again. I need this out of my life." And then I relapsed. And then the second time I got the Lyme, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just embrace it and make it part of my life instead of like shunning it. And I'm gonna take people along on the ride with me on my journey. And so that's kind of what I did originally. I started doing that. And then from there is when I started that's when and I enjoyed doing that so much. That's when I started the Badass CEO, just because I was like, oh, like I'm already doing it once. I know how to do it now. Like what else? And I can incorporate it with what I was already doing anyway. So it's just kind of taking people along for the ride on both aspects of my life, you know?
Yes. So what are the symptoms of Lyme disease?
Oh, how every first of all, it's like they call it the great imitator because it imitates so many different illnesses. And that's why it's really hard to diagnose because there's not really one test that's reliable. There's a lot of false negatives. But the best generalization I would say is it feels like you have Alzheimer's because your memory goes and you have like, you cannot remember anything like names, like my conversation I had yesterday. So it feels like you have Alzheimer's. It feels like you have the worst hangover you've ever had. Like you just don't want to get out of bed, or when you do get out of bed, you just can't wait to get back into bed. Like, those days when you're hungover and you're like, I got to go to work, but you just cannot wait to get back into bed at 6 o'clock when you get home. So it's kind of like having the worst. And then also having arthritis, like your joints hurt so badly. So it's like a mono arthritis, hungover, you got Alzheimer's all in one.
Wow, that sounds
It's
horrible.
awful. It's awful. It's very, very, very painful.
Yes.
I'm pretty much through it for the most part. I do get aches and pains here and there, and I have like a stamina. Like I can't stay out super late and whatnot. But for the most part, I've managed my symptoms, and I've learned a lot along the way. And that's one thing I would impart on all your listeners. Like one thing I've learned is just don't burn yourself out. It's just not worth it. And do what you love. Like if you don't love the job you're in right now, go find another job. Like life is just too short, and get rid of toxic people in your life. Like if you have a toxic boss, get the hell out of there. Or like if you have a toxic client, it's not worth the money. Go find a different client. Like it's going to come back at some point in your life health wise, and then I think it's actually interesting. Once I've kind of gone down this path and I've gotten rid of all the toxic things in my life, um, all it gets filled back up with all positive things. Like it's kind of like the power of positive. Like all of a sudden, all this other positive stuff comes into your life that was not able to come in before because you surrounded yourself. You had a bubble around you that was toxic. So it
That's so good. I just want to pause and think about that for a second because when you do get like I've had those really negative clients, for example. I've had a negative boss earlier in my career, and you're right. Like that takes up so much of your energy that
Mhm.
it doesn't leave room
It
for
doesn't
some
because
of
you just
those other
completely
things.
brought, everything's a vibration in everything's a
Yes,
vibration, right?
that's
So
right.
if you're vibrating at a lower level because you're talking about people or you're following the news or you're have toxic relationships in your life, like that's your life. You're at that toxic like level of like energy. Whereas if you get it out, then you can actually get at a higher vibration. And then all of a sudden you're attracting the higher vibrations, like positive things that run at a higher vibration than negative things. And you can't have both in your life. So you almost have to get rid of one to get to the higher level to run at that higher vibration.
This is absolutely accurate. Yes, just thinking about like, the whole quantum physics kind of things, like we do operate by vibration.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it truly there are negative and positive vibrations.
And
And
it's like the
so
80-20 rule, right? Like it's like 80% of your time is probably taken up by 20% of your clients. Like get rid of those 20%. And now
yes.
all of a sudden, like you'll realize like like the people you'll find like especially your clients are probably the more profitable ones are probably the one that takes the least amount of your time.
That's so true. And, like I still do this sometimes. I'll still take on projects occasionally that, as soon as I get into them, I'm like, why did I do that? I
Mhm.
know better than to take on this kind of, like you can feel it when this client's going to be a negative drain on you. You can feel
Yeah.
it from the beginning usually. And so I've gotten a lot better at trying to, in the beginning saying, it sounds like you might need someone that's, different than who we are, like and
Yeah.
get that person moved to somebody else where hopefully everybody gets on the positive place. But when I get into them, when I see them on my calendar, I'm dreading it.
Yeah,
And
and that's the
so,
time you gotta get rid of because like, listen to your gut, right? I mean, that's a good thing to
yes,
kind of, like, end on. It's like, follow your gut. Like, honestly, like, that little voice in you that's, like, your little girl voice, like, follow that. Like, if
yes,
stranger danger or if it's like, "Oh, I don't wanna do that," just listen to it because it's probably right.
right. That's exactly right. Your muse, your advisor, like people, call it like I heard someone talking about this the other day. Like if you're a writer and they talk about the muse, is they think of the muse as a separate person.
Mhm.
Like I'm going to meet the muse at my desk at 8 a.m. every morning, right? And so then you're expecting
Yeah,
that
that's a good
that
idea. Yeah.
inspiration, right? So it's sort of the same thing. It's like you allow yourself to think differently.
Mhm. Mhm.
So anyway, well, that is a great topic to end on because we want people thinking at a high level to get excited about their futures. And again, please go out, listen to the podcast. You want to give us the website? You're a badass
Sure,
CEO.
it's thebadassceo.com. And
Okay.
my podcast is on all platforms as well, but the link is also on my website. And I have a newsletter there too that I put out twice a week, newsletters, content to join as well.
Yes. So please go check that out. Go to Amazon or whatever where books are sold and buy the book. And Mimi, thank you for being a guest on our
Thank
program.
you so
It's
much, Bonnie.
so great to have you.
A special thank you to our listeners for taking time to tune in to this week's Real Life, Real Leaders podcast. We hope today's story inspired you. Check out previous episodes on the podcast to hear from more industry leaders and check back next week as we speak to another leader and hear his or her great stories of triumphs and messy struggles. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate, subscribe, and share. I'm Bonnie Hageman, and I look forward to sharing more with you next week.